The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Lunchtime Webinar Express series. We've got a great session today on marketing in China with CEO of Emerging Communications, Domenica Di Lieto. If you've watched any of our Webinar Express sessions before, then you'll know how this works. But for those joining us for the first time today, it's great to have you with us. And before I hand over to Domenica, I'll very quickly give you some information about the session and how you can submit your questions for the Q&A and where to go if you would like to watch the session again. So we'll be hearing from Domenica for around 30 to 35 minutes. We'll then move into a 10 to 15-minute Q&A session with answering some of your questions. You can post your questions at any time during the session by clicking on the question mark. We've circled the question mark for you. So if you're watching on a laptop, you'll find it on the right-hand side of your screen, or along the top or bottom if watching on a tablet or smartphone. Domenica has very kindly agreed for the slides to be available to download whilst we're broadcasting. So if you pop into the handouts section, which looks like a little memo icon with the top edge folded over, you can download them from there. And if you'd like to watch the session again, just head over to our YouTube channel, find Webinar Express under the playlists, and you'll find it in there along with the entire series of our webinars to date. We've got sessions covering a broad range of marketing skills and insights, all free to access and available whenever you want. So do take a look, as we've had some fantastic sessions since the series started. If you'd like to share any thoughts about today's webinar on the socials, you can use the hashtag #CIMEvents. We'd love to see your comments on the socials, so please do get involved and let us know what you think of today's session. And finally, if you're a university student attending today's webinar, then you may wish to sign up to the CIM Marketing Club. All you need to do is take a photo of the QR code that's on the screen. Alternatively, you can hop onto our website to find the Marketing Club webpage under the Qualifications drop-down menu. It'll keep you up to date with the latest trends, innovations and concepts in the marketing industry, so it really is worth taking a look and signing up. Okay, so I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker for today's session, Domenica Di Lieto from Emerging Communications. If you'd like to turn your web camera on, Domenica, hi, I'll pass things over to you and the floor is yours when you're ready.
Thank you very much. A lovely introduction, and hello to all of you this morning, or this afternoon even, in the UK. And there are a lot of attendees from a lot of different categories, so we've done our best to think of all of you on this presentation. So I'm going to get cracking. What am I going to cover? As I try and get this to move. So there are 4 things I want to cover today, and I've only got 35 minutes, and I'm very aware that some of you that I've spoken to know very little about the China market, and some of you are very seasoned Chinese marketers. So I've tried to make this relevant for all. So I'm firstly going to be covering why China can't be treated with the same strategies as you might use in other APAC markets. And I'm then going to move on to how you can tailor your communication to today's Chinese consumers, both B2B and B2C. How you then cut through the noise. China is a huge 3.2 billion population market, so how you can actually get some traction and mitigate risk and mitigate the amount of budget you're going to have to use. And then finally, and probably the most important, will be how do you go about doing it? What's your action plan? There are plenty of giveaways in this webinar towards the back end, which you can take away and you can read up on more of the things that I'm talking about. So Why is China not another market, just like any other APEC market? It's not like Taiwan, it's not like Hong Kong, it's not like Singapore. The first and most important thing is its sheer scale. So China, unbelievably, accounts for 1/4 of all digital marketing spend in the world. So that, just try and sort of compute that. That's 135 billion pounds was spent last year on digital advertising and marketing in China from one country. It's absolutely ginormous, which means that in order to get cut through and in order for your marketing to resonate and to be able to drive customer intent, it's really got to work. You can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach, put it in Mandarin and hope for the best. And we'll be talking about that a bit later. And not surprisingly, over 1/3 of that is video. So video advertising, video marketing, video engagement. And we're going to talk about how to use engaging video to drive intent a little bit later on. Not surprisingly, when you look at ad spend last year and you look at increase in ad spend, influencer and video ads top the leaderboard. So influencer ads in China and influencer campaigns are absolutely crucial to gain traction, even in some really complex B2B markets. It's not just about B2C consumer markets. And I'll give you some examples a little bit later on. But when we've interviewed Chinese consumers and we've read data and we've read sentiment from Chinese consumers in all sorts of markets, there is an overwhelming sentiment where over 1/4 of Chinese consumers in B2B and B2C feel underrepresented. And I'm not just meaning in terms of culture, I'm meaning that they find that Western companies, global companies operating in China don't get them, don't understand them. And this is something that really, I can't reiterate enough how important it is to get the narrative right. And I'll be talking about how to do that in a little bit later. Just to give you an idea of scale and technology and the importance of keeping up with changes in China, JD.com, for some of you who may not know, is one of the largest e-commerce platforms in China, much larger than Amazon. And it's now actually using driverless express delivery vehicles, so robotics, in order to deliver parcels in 30 cities. This is now expanding out throughout China. In order to pay for anything in China, you don't use a bank card and you certainly don't use cash. So if I'm paying for a musician on the street, I'll use WeChat Pay or Alipay from my phone. So now WeChat's just launched Palm Pay. You literally pay with your palm. So clever. And a couple of years ago, Alipay introduced paying with your facial recognition software. So China is far advanced from here in terms of not just payments, but smart homeware devices, robotics, AI intelligence, drone technology. It's really quite incredible, the speed at which things are changing. And just to give you an example of how Western brands have pivoted to China and done a really good job. I love this campaign. I've put the campaign link bottom right here for those that download the slides. Buick, American brand, relaunched its corporate identity last year. And not surprisingly, there were thousands of comments on Chinese social media. They were not positive. They likened the new logo and the corporate identity to, why do you now look like nail clippers? You are a car brand. And Buick could have done one of two things. They could have ignored it and gone, well, we've spent all this money on a new brand, there's not much we can do. But they didn't. They just went head on and they came up with a campaign. I've tried my best to translate this from Chinese. And Buick is here to protect every pair of professional and talented hands, but it sounds a lot better in Chinese than it does in English. And they gave away Buick nail clippers with every purchase. I mean, the whole thing is bonkers. But in the world of China, to go head on with the audience and say, actually, we did it on purpose, was just inspired. And this became not only a viral video, but a very, very, very successful campaign, and it could have absolutely been a disaster. So we've talked about the sheer scale of China, And I'm now going to talk, but not in too much detail, because the most important thing for me to talk about is the action plan at the end. So let's just talk about your consumers in China. The first most important thing to understand is Chinese Gen Z generation, so youngsters, okay, graduates, those in school. We speak to brands all the time that tell us that they aren't targeting this segment. And it doesn't matter if you're B2B or B2C, by the way, but do this at your peril, because 38% of all spend in China is from this very much this younger generation. And we have worked tirelessly with brands to understand that this Gen Z generation just don't operate like we do. I mean, not only are they younger than I am, they're used to different types of technology, they're used to things quicker, they're all about sustainability. So when you're trying to engage with this audience, think about experiences, think about engaging content. You've got to play the game their way, but if you can capture them and if you can engage them and you can make them happy, they will share. And this is the great thing, they will share content at an unbelievable rate. And some of the brands we work with have had such unbelievable success with this segment, even when previously they never targeted them before. There's a brand we work with that is very upmarket, apart hotels in London and Edinburgh, always targeted business travelers. We had to engage with the Chinese Gen Z generation in 2020, 2021 and 2022 because the borders between China and UK have been shut until January the 8th this year. By doing that, completely new segment, they could no longer book through Ctrip, which is the largest OTA in China. They booked directly through the WeChat channel, and we were able to drive nearly £250,000 worth of sales just from one new segment. Now, that is one of countless examples. And at the end of this webinar, there is a book or a guide that we've created around just this one audience and how to engage with them and who they are. So I strongly suggest having a read of that, whoever you are and from whatever category, because we've worked campaigns to be very successful in all sorts of categories. Secondly, and I think this is the most important thing for today, is it's no longer a question of basically broadcasting your message to Chinese audiences. It's got to be about a two-way communication with your audiences so that they feel part of the conversation, so that they interact and so that they share. Sorry, it's just a little bit of a lag here. Thank you. And it's about three things when you're thinking about audiences in China. Don't think about age groups, don't think about demographics, don't think about geographies. Those days are gone. Think about behaviour. Think about behaviour and cluster your audience. Be very clear who your audience is, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in our action plan section of this webinar, so that you can then create a dialogue that they will embrace, that they will interact with, and will actually trigger them to do something like share your content, buy your product, follow up your sales team. If you don't understand their pains, their needs and their wants, then marketing just isn't going to resonate in China, not just because of the way that the behavior now is in terms of expecting brands to deliver marketing in a way that they want, but also just the sheer scale of China. It's just so huge. And then keeping up with your audience and your customers all the time is absolutely paramount, because they're changing their behavior all the time. I think you might have to move the slides for me, so thank you very much. Ladybird, it has is a really good example. Ladybird's been in China for years. We've worked with them for a number of years, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to actually to engage directly with the customers, because the relationships with the distributors in China, they're the ones that are selling these books to customers. And what we then did was we did some very in-depth research with customers in China who are parents of many different categories. And then we found that actually the big issue was teaching English to underage school kids, so sort of like 0 or 1 to 5. And we came up with a campaign and we embraced some key opinion consumers, which I'll talk about in a second, and it was extremely successful. In fact, it was the #1 selling brand on that distributor channel that month. So it really is about understanding your audience and giving them stories in a way that they want to read them. And if you want to have human interactions and really influence decision making and drive intent, you need to be thinking about sustainability is a really big thing in China across all categories, across all segments, being responsible as a brand, and that means choosing wisely anybody that you partner with, especially influencers, any brand partnerships, and show real commitment to the market. So in other words, don't just translate what you're doing in other markets, put it into Chinese and expect it to resonate. Really understand your audience and what drives them. Even some of the most historically traditional B2B brands in China, IBM is a really good example, have done just that. They did an entire campaign around the 110th anniversary in China around trust. And they got their customers and their stakeholders and their investors in industry to talk about the brand. They made it a really incredible storytelling campaign. And so don't feel for one second that this is purely in the realms of B2C marketing. It's not. So let's move on to cutting through the noise. So for those that aren't aware, none of the Western platforms we use every day are available in China. So no Google, no Twitter, no Facebook, no Instagram, no LinkedIn, that left China 18 months ago, no Dropbox. And so we have our equivalents. We have Juhu and we have Douyin and we have WeChat and we have Bilibili, etc., etc. And there are thousands of channels in China. So I'm only going to cover a couple of the most notable and the most important. But you need to understand who your customers are, where they hang out, and then you can choose and select the right platforms to engage with your customers. So it's all about context. It's all about relevance. It doesn't matter whether you're doing programmatic advertising, paid search, social media, outdoor. Understanding your audience and getting the story right is the #1 thing to do. So you create a meaningful dialogue, as I said earlier on, and that will involve a multitude of channels at different stages of the sales funnel. And it's likely to involve some social media, some mass market media, and also let's not forget WeChat, which is part of the ecosystem of your CRM in China. So a little bit about influencer marketing. Influencers are obviously very important in every market now, especially for much younger audiences. But in China, they are paramount. They are essential no matter what industry you're in. And influencers can be literally derived within days. And this is a pop singer in China called Leo, and he's extremely popular. And when China locked down, I think it was the second or third lockdown, he became an overnight success as a fitness instructor on Chinese social media and gained 50 million plus viewers and followers within 12 days. He got bored. He decided to do his exercise routines in front of his fans. Those fans grew. And so why am I telling you this? And it's quite simply because brand collaborations in China are largely driven through influencer networks. So Fila, the sports brand, did a partnership with him, and now he's got people queuing at the door, spending upwards of £20,000 each time he does a new session on video because of the sheer numbers of the audience and the fact that the audience is sticky and it's got traction and it sells products. So influencers are born every day in China. There are 3 types you need to know about. Again, we have a guide about influencers. You can download that at the end. I will keep that page up for a little bit so that you can do that. But essentially, just understand there are 3 types. There's industry vertical media, there are key opinion leaders, and there are key opinion consumers. I won't go into too much depth because we don't have time and I'm conscious that it's already 1:18. But do be aware that at the end, I'll show you where that guide is so you can have a much better idea as to the different types of influencers. But just understand there is a hierarchy, okay? So you go from the top celebrity influencers with millions of followers, all the way down to KOCs and niche micro influencers. And typically, when we put together campaigns, we will be doing it with a mixture of KOLs and KOCs that are right for the brand, that are the right fit with the right audiences. They could be really niche. We've done it in some really niche industries like pharma and medicine and engineering and education. It doesn't have to be B2C. So influencers is anybody who is followed, who has an opinion that is a notable opinion in that industry. So it's not just a consumer-driven tactic. And a lot of the channels in the last 4 years, 3 especially, since COVID started in China in January 2020 until they opened the borders in January 23, video and social media channels have been the only way really for consumers to interact with brands. And so you've seen Bilibili and Douyin and Juhu and Douyin and Little Red Book grow and grow and grow in the last 3 years to becoming extremely popular. A little bit about Little Red Book. Most of you will have heard of it. It's a bit like a form of Chinese Insta, but better. It is now the #1 search engine for young audiences in China to find anything. Hotels, experiences, education, apparel, fashion, beauty, music, food and drink, you name it. And in fact, we recently did a campaign for Hemswell Antique Centre up in Lincolnshire using some influencers on Little Red Book. And it's become now this famous place to go for art dealers to buy things that they can't buy elsewhere. And that's just, you know, a fantastic company in Lincolnshire that is leveraging Chinese influencers to drive business. And we've used it in the property industry, and this is an example of a brand that we work with that got 300 inquiries, and their properties are over 2 million. So this is not a small purchase. So Little Red Book is becoming the search engine of choice through the use of video and amazing photography and telling stories. So it's a storytelling platform, really popular with a lot of brands. And then you compare that to Bilibili. Bilibili used to be an anime platform with very distinct younger audiences. It's now widely viewed by all consumer bases in China, with 13 million videos being uploaded a day. It's insane. And that's Max there, one of our favorite influencers we work with, especially in the education market. He's English, speaks fluent Chinese, grew up in China. He's now studying over here, and he's done some fantastic work with us on Bilibili. He's a Bilibili influencer. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers, and he creates stories and narrative for brands. He's great to work with. And I'll move on from, because we just mentioned him. So growing your brand in China now. Let's get into the nitty gritty about how we do this, because I'm conscious I've got 15 minutes to do that. So the brands that I talk about often that are being successful in China are not the largest. They're not the ones with the biggest budgets, although you do need to have a budget to dedicate to China. They're the ones that are the most agile. So a lot of the challenger brands in a lot of categories that can move quicker, where they don't have such robust and hierarchical board level structures where they can make decisions really quickly, are doing really well, because it's all about pivoting to opportunities in China and understanding your audiences and their behavior, and having a strategy that is totally customer centric, so understanding who your Chinese customers are and planning accordingly, and being very open to learn from what your competitors are doing. Those 3 qualities or attributes of brands, they're the ones that are doing really, really well in China. So my first tip to everybody here is be focused. It's a huge market, billions and billions of customers. So choose your niche, be really clear where you're competing in what niche with objective research. Ask your customers, find out why they're buying from you, and create unique stories around that. And put the right effort into the right channels. You'll be better off starting with one channel and doing it brilliantly as a pilot than spreading yourself too thin and actually not gaining any traction. So University of Dundee was exactly that case in point. We worked with them. Their budget had to work really smartly. We were able to create over 100,000 interactions or clicks. We've driven 578 students via inquiry forms, so applications essentially, just in one. In fact, it wasn't, it was 5 months these stats were based on. So it was the back end of last year. We've been working together for 5 months. It's incredible. But that's because we chose to do the right marketing on the right channel in the right way. Tip number 2 is be really clear. What does success look like? What are your objectives? And make them very quantifiable. I want to grow sales, Domenica, from 15, we're barely doing anything, let's just say 150,000 on Tmall, and I want to go to 3 million. That's a tangible objective. Or I want to grow from 200 students to 800 students in 2023 academic cycle. Be very clear what success looks like, because then a plan can be derived around those benchmarks, and track absolutely everything through the funnel. What's working, what channels are actually delivering what result. And Kantar's a really good example. They've been operating for years in China, but their cost per acquisition was huge. We reduced it by 90%. We moved the channels that they were operating on. Their customers just weren't hanging out there. So it's all about relevance at the end of the day. And the third tip is sales integration. And I've had a look at the industries on this webinar. This is the single most important thing I can say, is integrate your sales and marketing effort. Most of you have got distributors or agents or salespeople in China, or one person. Make sure you're talking to them on a regular basis. What are the objections they're getting from clients? What are the things stopping customers buying through Tmall or however you're selling your products? And make sure you integrate your marketing and your sales to increase conversions. That's something we spend a lot of time doing, and it's absolutely crucial, because success is only as good as the sales that you're driving in market. So make sure that you integrate that effort. It's really, really important. I'm not going to go into too much detail. There's lots of case studies in here. You'll also find them on our website, just because I'm conscious I want to get through to the action plan. And number 4, capitalizing on your challenges, is China will always be challenging. China is always going to throw curveballs. Every week there's new legislation we have to dig through, and we have to pivot our clients' campaigns. So it's better to just think of it that China is always going to be challenging, and what can we do to capitalize on that? Customers are becoming more picky. They're changing their minds about how, why they want to buy things. You need to adapt to their behavior, and you need to change approaches accordingly. There's a client we've worked with now for 5 years in the education space, property education space. They provide the most upmarket university accommodation. They're the largest player in the UK. Obviously, borders shut, no students were coming in. And so we had to completely pivot to actually targeting students in alternative accommodation, so in competitive accommodation. And we drove them 2,208 inquiries. In fact, it was their best year, 2020. We won awards for the work. So there is always a way to pivot through any challenge, as long as you move quick enough and you're aware of what's going on in the market. So my takeaways for today are: have a clear plan. And I'm going to show you an infographic in a minute that you can download. So research your market, have a clear differentiation in the eyes of the consumers so that you know you can compete. Know your audiences. Tailor your messaging accordingly. So what are the clusters you're targeting, and what are you saying to those clusters? Cut through the noise by delivering messages that work to the right audience on the right channel mix, and track everything. If you do those 5 things, you will be successful. So I'm going to leave this up here for a second. So we've got 4 guides you can download. They're also on our site. And you can scan those QR codes, or you can put those URLs in. And if you download this deck, you'll also find this in the deck as well. So there's one on Chinese Gen Z in a lot more detail, who they are and how to target them. There's one on Chinese influencer marketing. There's one on Little Red Book, and there's one on Weibo. And we are soon to launch one on WeChat, Juhu, and Bilibili and Douyin. So if you sign up to our e-newsletter or follow me on LinkedIn, you will find that you will find that there is more information coming. Plus, I'm also always sharing things on LinkedIn as well. And then this is probably the most important thing. I've actually created an infographic for this webinar for everybody here. If you scan that QR code or put that into a browser, that URL, there is an 8-step process, the 8 C's methodology, I call it, of what order you do things in to map out your China plan. And if anybody has difficulty, please email me afterwards or contact me on LinkedIn and I can take you through that by phone. And it really is all the things we've discussed today about your competitors and your customers and the landscape and your differentiator and your comms plan and your channel mix has to be done in a sequential order. And if you do that and you are very clear with your KPIs, you will be successful. So I've actually finished dead on time, which I think is quite unbelievable. I'm going to leave that up there. That's my email address if you would like to ask any questions after the webinar, and also follow me on LinkedIn. And please, if you found this insightful, please do share it on LinkedIn, or if you've got any questions or any feedback, I would appreciate it. I have run through so quickly to try and do this in 35 to 45 minutes. And I've now got plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm now going to hand back for questions.
Thank you, Domenica. That was absolutely fascinating. Really, really interesting presentation. So we're going to do a few questions. We've got time for Q&A now. We've already received some good questions to get us underway. So we'll go into that in a second. But please do continue to post any questions that you might have, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the next 10-15 minutes or so. And just a little reminder that if you'd like to comment on the socials about today's webinar, then you can use the hashtag CIM events, which we've popped up on the screen again now for you. Okay, so heading to our first question, it's actually an amalgamation of a couple of questions that came in, Domenica, looking at how much is needed to be spent on a meaningful influencer campaign in China. And in particular, one question was asking how much was spent on the Ladybird campaign to drive the 500,000 revenue.
Oh, right. Okay. I will answer it in 3 parts. So doing something is better than doing nothing. So Hemswell is a really good example. I'm not going to say what the investment was, but it was fairly nominal, using UK-based Chinese KOLs that we took up to their art dealership by train, and we spent the day basically engaging them in the whole story and briefing them, and then they live streamed some, and then they created posts, and that's been unbelievably successful. I think the return is 6-fold so far, and it launched a couple of weeks ago. You compare that to stuff that we've done for some B2C brands, and you're looking in the 50s, 100s, 150s. I can't divulge what Ladybird spent, but their return was 8-fold, I think. It's substantial. But it's really about choosing the right influencers, the right campaign, and the right story. So we've got brands. I was talking to one this morning, really fascinating in the food and drink sector. We'll be doing and targeting London-based KOLs around an experience before we move his marketing into China, because he's going to have to set up a load of channels and operational procedures over there. So there are always ways to do pilot campaigns. At Cheval, that I talked about, was a pilot campaign with Gen Z audiences, and then it started to work and we started to do more. Typically, micro influencers start at a couple of thousand, I suppose, but celebrity ones are at hundreds of thousands. But I wouldn't start at the top. I would start with a pilot scheme. So if anybody wants to have a budget or a proposal, I'd need to know your market, but it does vary. We do lots of influencer campaigns in the education sector as well. And that's normally a mixture of niche KOLs and some more sort of media-based PRE type KOLs. But yeah, I hope that sort of answers. The questions
That's
that really varies on the category and your competition, to be honest with you. But it's about choosing the right one with the right story, so you don't waste money.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that also touched on a little bit one of the other questions, which was you've possibly covered with what you've just said, which was about any recommendations of successful brand awareness and conversion campaigns in higher education. They asked for examples, which obviously you showed during the presentation, one particular example, but whether there are any particular recommendations on the higher education sector specifically.
Absolutely. Have a look at our website. We've got 4 case studies on there, plus blogs as well. We tend to deal with universities, public schools, and education providers where their KPIs are high. So if somebody comes to us and says, I need an intake of 15 Chinese students, it's just too small, we're tending to deal with the likes of University of Stirling and Dundee and universities who are looking to drive hundreds of students for different faculties. So that's the first thing. So I can't really talk on behalf of universities with really small targets. Success stories, all of ours are, and I'm more than happy to send case studies around. So we've taken them from previous agencies where they've got the same spend, but we are trebling or quadrupling the number of intake that they get for the same spend. It's about being smart with your spend. There's a very good case study I put up 2 weeks ago for Dundee, actually University of Dundee. So have a look at that on our website, because that's got everything in there in terms of results, but also the funnel that we used and the channel mix that we used. Yeah, that might help.
Great, thank you, Domenica. Another question that has come in is asking how you see the risks focusing on the Chinese market, especially posed by the geopolitical tensions recently.
Wow, don't hold back. Okay, 2 things on this one. I wrote a blog yesterday, so it's going up on our website before the weekend, about mitigating risk and PR disasters. If you can let me know who you are, email me. I'll make sure you get that on Monday. That covers half of the answer. The other half is very simple. So China is the number 2 economy in the world, and soon will be the number 1 economy. There are political shenanigans going on between China and US. Things aren't great between us and China because we don't have a very good trade agreement. But it doesn't change the fact that China is a very important economy. It doesn't change the fact that if you want to learn about innovation and AI and tech, you don't go to Silicon Valley, you go to China. What we're looking at now, such as drone technology, so fireworks done by drones, for example, they've been in China for 10 years. When you see the 3D adverts coming out from this, outdoor advertising, that was going on. I saw my first one in China 7 years ago. Robotics, a robotic hotel I stayed in a couple of years ago where there's no humans at all. That was 5 years ago. So China is the number 1 innovation hub in the world, so you can't ignore it. You just have to be extremely careful culturally with what you say, from a legal standpoint and a cultural standpoint, and that's all in my blog. So I've got examples of people that didn't take the right advice. And I'll be pleased to say that it tends to be the bigger brands that screw it up, and that's because they think that they can just bulldoze their way into the market, which is the wrong way to do it. But please reach out afterwards and I can give you more of a off the record chat, shall we say. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. One question that's popped in just a second ago: is it necessary to have Mandarin translated website, or is it possible to have campaign focused landing pages specifically for the Chinese market, or is it a mix of both that is best?
It depends on your category and it depends on what channels you're operating. So if you are operating Baidu paid search campaign, you have to have landing pages. If you are in other sectors, you might be able to pilot by starting with WeChat, Little Red Book, Douyin. Really depends, and I'd need to talk to you about what category you're in. Websites in China it's a bit of a conundrum really, because websites in China are not important. So if you're in e-commerce, you'll be going to Tmall, Taobao, JD, Little Red Book, WeChat stores. You won't be going to a website. So it's a lot of people invest an awful lot of money in semantic markup for Chinese SEO and putting a lot of effort into translation and localization in UX for Chinese website, but forget about the hosting, and hosting's a real issue in terms of accessibility of content, or they'll have Western links that will get blocked. So I do tend to err away from websites depending on what industry you're in. If you're in education, you still need a website, and we build websites for universities, plus we would have landing pages. So the answer is, for universities, I'd say both. For other industries, I'd probably have a WeChat mini program or a customized menu bar. It depends on your industry. So contact me afterwards, and I can answer that properly when I know what industry you're in.
Great. One question referring to the best channels for B2B, and whether there were any restrictions on advertising in China and the Chinese market, and anything to be aware of with regards to data protection when trying to generate leads. From a lead generation point of view, anything to be aware of, they've asked. So a couple of questions within one in there.
There's three there. Data protection, not my bag. It's my MD's remit. Rachel's amazing. So contact me afterwards. The new legislation that was passed last year, we're very well aware of it, and we have to make sure that we abide by it. But it's an area of expertise that I leave for my lawyers. So park that one and contact me afterwards. I'll put you on to Rachel. The other thing was right channels for B2B. This comes again, everybody focuses on channels without thinking about audiences. So we work in the pharma, medicine, physical chemistry, engineering, biotech. We've got so many industries we work for B2B, and all of the channels we leverage will be relevant to where their customers hang out. But what I would say is 90% of B2B players that we deal with, their marketing mix or channel mix normally includes offline events, online webinars, WeChat for collecting customer data and for customer service and to support their sales team, and a couple of vertical channels, probably Weibo, but it could well involve Juhu and a couple of vertical channels for your specialism. So again, it depends on what category you're in. The other question you asked, so one was GDPR, the other was, I think, around legislation. Again, was it?
Yeah, so any restrictions on advertising?
Yeah, so there are some categories that are highly restricted in China: pharma, finance, property. There are words you can't use. There are things you must not do, but it depends on your industry. Making false claims, absolutely not allowed to do. You're not even allowed to make any claim in China. You're not allowed to use the word investment when it comes to property. So we have to find ways around that. So it's about creative storytelling. But there are certain industries, again, I don't know what these industries are, that are highly legislated. Finance and pharma are the two of the most highly legislated categories in China. But there is always a way around it in terms of what you say and where you put your advertising. We have most of our B2B categories we deal with are highly legislated. So again, I'd need to know more about the brand and the category you're operating in. But yes, you need to be aware of. That's why you use a specialist agency to do your marketing. Yeah.
Thank you, Domenica. I don't know if we've got time for one more. Last question that's just popped in. They're interested in getting your views of in-person exhibitions.
Right.
Unsure about the value of sector-focused exhibitions.
Fantastic, they're brilliant. In fact, I'm just about to post about one that we were at last weekend in China to support one of our amazing B2B clients that's been with us for 6 years. It was a really big problem. Up until recently, they all got postponed or delayed or didn't happen at all in the last 3 years. For B2B marketing, they are really important. But having brand awareness and having done that due diligence and dialogue ahead of the exhibition means that then people will come and seek you out. We always, when we're at exhibitions and events, we always make sure there's a call to action to collect data on WeChat. that there are meetings that actually happen at the event. So it's part of a marketing mix. It's not the only thing. I also really advocate webinars so that the reach can go to the whole of China and not just to those going to the event. But it's about category specialization in B2B. So I'd say very important, but it's just the way that you attract the audience in the first place and collect their data is very different in China. We don't use email, we use WeChat, for example. So yeah.
Great, thank you. I think that's probably all we've got time for the webinar today. Thank you, Domenica. I'd like to say a huge thank you to you for your fantastic presentation, and to the CIM Wales Group for organising the webinar. We do hope you've enjoyed the session and found it interesting and worthwhile. And hopefully we've been able to answer most of the questions that came in as well. We'll be sending out a short survey in the next few hours, and we'd love to hear your feedback. It'll only take a few minutes, and all the survey responses are anonymous, so please do let us know your thoughts on the session and what you'd like to see from our webinar series in the future. We'll be back with our next webinar, Express, on Wednesday, the 19th of April, with Dave Plunkett from Collaboration Junkie. So head on over to the events page of our website to find out further details and to register for this session. So that just leaves me to say a final thank you to you for joining us today, and we hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Take care, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.